Bum, 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 bum.
Welcome to the Good Energy Project with Lou Connor, a surprisingly hopeful show about the invisible economic forces that shape our lives, our homes, and our future on planet Earth.
Kia ora, and welcome to the Good Energy Project. I feel like I've been preparing and looking forward to this interview for the whole year. Today I'm going to be talking to my old friend Ellie Yates and her friend and co-conspirator Ren, otherwise known as Tamsin or Tammy Blundell. So Ellie and Ren are part of the 4-person team that convenes Gathering at the Gate, an 8-week course which I took part in earlier this year. The aim of the course is to offer a kind and encouraging space for Pākehā or white assimilated folk to come together and do the work we need to do to become good treaty partners to Māori and to honour Te Tiriti or Waitangi. This year, my focus for the Good Energy Project has been the economics of home and kāinga. I've been particularly inspired by reading the book Kāinga by Paul Tapsell. The sense I've got about traditional kāinga and marae communities is that they held and anchored all the intricate relationships between the people and the land and the knowledge that sustained them both. Over the last few months, I've been learning a whole lot about how the processes of colonisation and capitalism have disrupted these webs of relationships between the people and the land and separated us all out so that we can become productive in this system. Through the Good Energy Project, I'm hoping to tautoko the efforts of Māori to recentre and empower kāinga and marae communities in the economy. I'm also interested in what we can do as Pākehā to build our own sense of home and belonging. To me, the treaty is an incredibly generous invitation to make our home here, and that feels like a foundational step if we're going to come together and contribute fully. As one of my recent guests, Anika Green, pointed out, when we feel like we belong, it's easy to be generous. For me, doing Gathering at the Gate this year has been a vital part of my exploration of home and belonging. And that's why I've invited Ellie and Ren to have this conversation, to explore the fundamental question of how we, as descendants of settlers, find our homes here, and what those homes could look like. What do we need to acknowledge and address to make our relationships right here? This is the mahi that Ellie and Ren are deeply involved in. A major focus of the Gathering at the Gate course was inquiring into our family histories. And this responds to a challenge from Māori that for Pākehā to understand our relationship with this whenua and to engage with mana whenua, we need to understand our own whakapapa, who we are, where we come from, and how exactly we came to be here. The idea is that we're gathering at the gate of the marae and preparing ourselves to meet tangata whenua. In the course, we were encouraged to get to know our family trees and our ancestors who first came to Aotearoa. We learnt about the racist policies, laws and wars through which our settler ancestors accessed land and Māori were displaced and disempowered. We were challenged to identify the ways in which we have benefited personally from those historical injustices through inheriting wealth or property and taking the opportunities we've had due to being white. This was difficult work. As soon as we lifted the lid on the topic, I was hit by a thick wave of shame, swirling fears that I'd say the wrong thing or that I don't belong here. Ellie, Ren and the other facilitators were incredibly kind and gentle, and the course didn't leave us at that point. We were invited to reach further back into our own earth-honouring ancestors in England, Ireland, Scotland and Europe, to find customs, rituals or songs from these traditions that might nourish our spirits now. We explored the history of land enclosures, witch hunts, and the violent ways our own ancestors were cut off from their land, practices and wild places. We were also encouraged to look for the humanity in our settler ancestors, to recognise their strengths and find ancestors that we feel supported by and proud of. The aspect of the course that touched me the most were the embodied parts. We were encouraged to find a sit spot near our homes that we could return to regularly during the course, just to sit and be with the rocks and trees and birds, to acknowledge the history of the land, the care of tangata whenua, and to connect with our own ancestors. What felt profound about the sit spot practice for me was that it brought the conversation down from my head with all the swirling judgments and confusion and into my body. I don't know a lot yet about my ancient earth-honouring roots or my settler ancestors, but I could actually feel their presence along with a sense of grief and dislocation in my body. The course gave me a sense of direction, of where to put my energy, that by uncovering the very particular stories of my ancestors, I can start to release a whole lot of stuck energy and begin to restore my relationships now. So to give you a little background on Ellie and Ren, I've known Ellie for about 10 years, I think, and I've always admired the way she goes about her life with deep seriousness and fun. Something I've connected with Ellie around is her experience of growing up within a strong spiritual community and then grappling as a young adult to integrate her spiritual practice and community with her commitment to activism. Ellie has spent a lot of time at the Wangapeka Retreat Centre near Motueka and has been active in organising youth retreats there. We were also involved in setting up a community group called Mindfulness for Change, which was aimed at integrating activism and spirituality. Ellie studied Te Reo Māori at Te Wānanga o Raukawa and has worked as a teacher in Pōneke, Wellington, Ōtaki and Mōhua, Golden Bay, where she's currently living with her partner and little boy. I first met Ren, or Tammy, as you were then known, maybe still known, sometimes by some people, doing the Gathering at the Gate course this year, and I felt immediately at ease in her warm presence. Some things I've recently learnt about Ren are that she was born in Nelson Hospital and grew up in a grand old house built in 1863, a colonial structure which she said informed her upbringing. She was very fond of her grandmother, who was a wonderful gardener, and, unusually for the time, spoke Te Reo Māori. Ren has spent much of her adult life travelling, gardening, beekeeping, practising permaculture, building community, organising and engaging in whatever ways she can as a white body in the movement against white supremacy. Ellie and Ren and their two teammates, Danny and Erin, formed Gathering at the Gate at the Social Movements Resistance and Social Change Conference in Te Whanganui Atara in November 2020. And they'd already met before that through a group called Tau Iwi Mō Māteke Mai Aotearoa, as well as through attending anti-racism trainings with Turtle Island-based organisation White Awake. And it seems that through working together, they've become great friends. And I'm very excited to talk to you both today. That was a very long introduction. So welcome. And you're both in Mōhua, Golden Bay at the moment?
We are. Rainy Mōhua.
Mm-hmm.
Parapara.
With a spectacular plate of snacks to fuel the conversation.
Thanks to Jeffrey.
Thanks, Ren and Jeffrey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, we've got a seasonal platter of goodies waiting for us to fuel the conversation.
Lovely. So I wondered if I could begin where I always like to begin, with a question about your childhoods. The question is, can you remember a moment in your childhood where you felt really happy and in your element?
I used to climb out my window at night and climb down a tree and run to the beach.
Oh, wow.
In the night.
That sounds so exciting.
Yeah, it was exciting. And I lived in a real fantasy world. There were lots of critters and magic, and this was my secret thing that I used to do.
That's quite cool to have a window that had an accessible tree next to it.
It was ideal.
And then a beach to run to.
It was quite far away, through the paddocks, across the road, down the
How old would you have been then?
Oh, I don't know, but it's one of my earliest memories.
Wow.
So yeah, quite little.
And do you
Oh, no.
remember, can you describe the feeling of it?
Adventurousness, and I guess it was a bit naughty and sneaky.
Mm.
Yeah, quite wild,
Mm.
but felt accompanied by my magical friends.
Oh, who were they?
Well, there was a dragon. I can't believe we're talking about this. This is not what I was planning to talk about.
A dragon?
But it was based loosely on the never-ending story.
Oh,
Luck
wow.
Dragon?
Yeah.
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 There were some cats.
Mm. Imaginary ones or real ones?
Oh, yeah, imaginary ones.
Mm. That's so cool. No wonder you were brave enough to do it with that team
That's right.
supporting you. What about you, Ellie? Do you remember being young and...
Yeah, a lot of things are coming to mind, but one in particular is any kind of occasion like birthdays or Christmas or whatever. I would be with my cousins and we'd always put on plays.
Oh, cool.
My sister, yeah, I remember being like really, really passionate about the way that it all came together, the production, and like the costumes that everyone had to wear and the lines that everyone had to say and the timing and you know, I might have even had like a wand or something. I definitely remember being in charge.
Were you in charge? Yeah, I was wondering about what role you played.
Well, I was, and I wasn't. I have the memory of being in charge, but when I think about it now, my other cousins were all like 10 years older than me. So I think actually they would have been humouring me and being really inclusive, probably putting up with my like weird desires for drama, and they might have actually been playing a totally different game at the same time. But yeah, I remember feeling like it was a family affair.
And was it
I loved being in the family.
What was the feeling of being able to direct these shows with your wand?
I think it is like an imaginary world coming to life, a little bit like what Ren's talking about, like magical friends. But I had a lot of characters also go that I'd be having conversations with like a chance to share that with all the adults and make it real.
And being in this family group where you could do that.
Yeah, exactly. I like being in a big cast of people and being some like adrenaline and something to build up to.
Yeah.
Oh,
that sounds really exciting.
It was.
My next question is about how you came to become aware of, because from doing Gathering at the Gate, the things that I've been learning recently, it's kind of like it's the water we're swimming in that I wasn't even aware of before. But these things seem so important that I can't believe I didn't know them when I was younger. And I'm really interested in this process of coming to see the impacts of racism and colonisation. And I'd love to hear about how you first became aware of those powers in our world and whether it happened gradually or whether there was a particular moment you remember.
It's interesting, as I was lying awake with my awake child last night, I was thinking about that question actually, and was it at school where I learned about racism, or when I went travelling, or when I did my bachelor's? I think there's certain moments that I look back on and I go, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. I can't believe I thought it was appropriate for me to say be part of this Māori and Pacifica writers workshop at the International Institute of Modern Letters, at Victoria University. I did this amazing paper, but I don't know why I was accepted into it, because I was the only here and it was for Māori and Pacific writers. That was in my third year of uni. I would not put myself forward for that now. I would not take up a space in a course like that now. So I clearly wasn't, even after 3 years of study, kind of conscientized to that level.
What were
By
you
then,
studying? Was it something related?
I was studying English and sociology and art history. Those were my majors. And then I just randomly decided to do this one writing course. Yeah, and it's like I remember that I got feedback on some of my writing. This is so shameful, from the amazing writer and thinker Emalani Case. She's a Pacifica activist. She sort of just gently said, you really need to locate yourself in the writing as a white settler, as descendant of white settlers and beneficiary of the colonial project. And I just had no idea really what she was meaning. I think I just was like, oh, true. So, I don't know how my education in sociology and that hadn't really equipped me with that consciousness. I think it came later through being actually in the classroom, I would say.
Oh, the classroom studying te reo? Or...
No, the classroom teaching, being a teacher, I would say, and studying te reo. But I think when I did my master's, I did some papers then that were like specifically focusing on the educational achievement gaps between white Europeans and Māori students. I think it was that year that I went to see Moana Jackson speak a couple of times on abolition, and his statistics were like echoing the statistics I was learning. So I think that made a big impression, and just seeing how institutional racism works. But I had a sheltered childhood, I would say, and the only reason that I went to like a pretty whitewashed school, a Steiner school, which was incredible in some ways, but didn't have a lot of brown friends or friends of colour, and it was really just my dad learning te reo Māori. And speaking te reo Māori at home, like learning from scratch, because he was like a Birmingham boy. And sharing that with me, that even gave me the interest or like the idea to go and probably pick it up later anyway. But it's a really good question, Lou. I also had a cousin, related to my previous answer. I have a cousin who has always really inspired me politically. He was really involved in the student union. He ran like concerts for Palestine when I was growing up. I remember him being a real kind of strong. He gave me books by Edward Said and like encouraged me to learn about race relations. How about you, Ren?
Lots of parallels. Maybe I'll start with the moment where it really hit home, which was in Waitangi. I also managed to make it through school and university without hearing much about Tiriti or having much of an education around race and colonialism. And after uni, found my way to living in Waitangi, which, for those of you who don't know, is a small place 2 hours north of Napier, where Ngāti Kahungunu are mana whenua, and I ended up at a Te Akarangi night class on a Tuesday night with a few friends. I think mainly because it was just kind of something to do and there wasn't a heck of a lot to do. And just over the year or so of attending that, starting to just be in the presence of Māori and the loss of te reo and...
So was it a lot of Māori who were attending that course with you?
Yeah, mostly. It mostly was, a few random Pākehā as well. And others, it was just like the wool was pulled away from my eyes, and I was just like, whoa, there's so much that I don't know. After that, I lived in Hokianga, so that was a kind of similar experience, and was living and working with folks who were really political environmentally, and also really closely working with local Māori to do environmental protection.
Was that kind of your way in, sort of through the environmental focus?
Oh, yeah, I think it was. Yeah, because we would write the songs for the protests and perform them. I played the mandolin.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And just being in the presence of those speeches, and Māori didn't cede sovereignty, and I was like, what? So it was a huge awakening. And at some point during that time, I met this beautiful Pākehā wahine, Laura Alp. She was a fluent te reo speaker, and had a Māori family and taught at a kohanga reo, and she was super encouraging of me to just like dive right in and learn te reo, get amongst it. And so I just brashly signed up for the full-time hekereo course at Te Wānanga. Again, like Ellie says,
Yeah.
just walks right in there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I definitely feel pretty cringy about that now.
Yep. So why is that?
Well, it's like I had the money, I had the time,
Mm.
and so I could move there, go there, and there are so many Māori who don't have the money or the time or the capacity to just move to Otaki and learn their reo. So yeah, I didn't realise at the time the privilege that I had to even go there. And yeah, so then spent a year of that, and I was one of only 2 Pākehā in the rōpū of about 30 people. And yeah, that was a proper education.
Yeah. So what was that like? How did it feel?
Yeah, I felt a lot of anxiety, a lot of shame, and yeah, it was just this sort of feeling of just melting on a regular basis, of just layers of understandings that had been hidden from me that were just coming to light. And I didn't display that in front of my classmates. Like, that was something that happened in private, sort of regular meltdowns. And yeah.
I think we talked the other day about how big shame is and how it's really the big thing that we meet as Pākehā in going on this kind of journey. Yeah, I'm really interested in your experience of shame and how you've navigated that.
Yeah, I certainly still sit with it. It's still a force and something that I feel, but I think it's appropriate to feel. But I think I was saying the other day that it feels softer now. Maybe just it's a question of exposure and just having a lot of exposure and allowing myself to feel those things has sort of taken some of the edge off, and also just to have found ways that I can show up to start to make changes. And yeah.
What about you, Ellie? Yeah.
Well, I'm just thinking about your question again, and how it seems like for both me and Ren, there's been this period of time of like diving into kaupapa Māori. So I would say that being the journey, like you were asking about, and like a moment of recognition, or like you said, doing the course was a real kind of worldview shift, paradigm shift. Yeah, I think for me it's been in stages, because there's like no awareness at all. And then there's like, oh yeah, Te Tiriti or Waitangi, Māori did not cede sovereignty. Oh, okay, what does that mean? Oh, all the ways that Te Tiriti hasn't been honoured, all the ways that white folks have been privileged in terms of property and ownership and wealth and all of this stuff because of that. Awareness grows. And Te Ao Māori is like really beautiful, and I could be part of revitalisation. I could be in these spaces. But still, for me, like the bit where I'm actually looking at myself in that picture has only been in the last couple of years to be suddenly aware of like my own, like Ren's saying, your own body in a Māori space. How effective that is, not just to blithely go along and maybe reproduce or perpetuate certain ways of being, which I don't see, because it's, like you said, it's the water we're swimming in, like a white space. Like the dominant culture is this big white space, and certainly working in high school is like that. But then part of the recent realizations is that I am part of that white space, and by virtue of my racial identity. So yeah, it's pretty layered. Yeah, and I would say that doing Gathering at the Gate, we went through that process together, and then running the course a few times, it's definitely helping kind of tease apart the difference.
Yeah, I'd say you're still sort of in that process yourself as you're facilitating the course.
Yeah, I think that's a big value for us, isn't it? Like, we're all learning all at the same time. We're really trying not to be experts. We're not experts. So yeah, we just have a good feeling that doing our own whakapapa research, and it's been called for by Māori, hasn't it? So it's kind of like just answering the call to learn a bit more about ourselves and Pākehā, to work with other Pākehā, because a dynamic that I've felt in the past is that I don't really want anything to do with other Pākehā.
Yeah,
And
too much shame
I
or
don't want to be identified with it. Yeah, too much shame, exactly. But to sit with the shame and then with other white folks and their shame, although it's been hard, it actually feels really like the right thing to do.
And I think I said in my introduction that one of the things that I really enjoyed most about gathering at the gate was the sit spot exercise and the kind of focus on finding our own spirituality in a way. And I'm quite interested in how you kind of discovered that or how you found that practice.
Yeah, I could speak to that.
Yeah.
This is Ren speaking. Maybe we should say that because we have had feedback that we sound the same.
Okay. Yeah, that'd be good.
The sit spot is a practice that I learned at Tracker School in northern New South Wales with John Young from Tom Brown Jr.'s lineage of tracking. And yeah, it was a very simple practice of just having a wee spot somewhere outside where you go and sit on a very regular basis, maybe daily, maybe at the same time, maybe not, and just be in a kind of state of receptivity to what's going on there. Yeah, at that time that I spent in Australia, it was incredible what came through with something so simple of being all together in a group and then going out to the land in small groups and then individually sitting and then coming back together, and just the stories and things that we kind of heard from the land. I'm saying heard, it's kind of like or sensed or experienced. There's this sort of sense of becoming more in tune with place in a way that's not like production focused or not looking for like things that we can use or moving through quite fast, but sort of just being in a different way.
Come, lovers, sing me now on silver thread of star, on gentle wing and breeze, still cradled deep. Your body knows my name. Your body knows my name.
Was that kind of a revelation that you can have a conversation with the land
Yeah,
and have a relationship?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, like the kind of songs and stories that started pouring out of myself and people.
Oh, really? So you actually had songs and stories?
Yeah. Sometimes they were really like painful ones.
And what about ancestors? Because you encouraged us to see if we could connect with ancestors and even have conversations. How have you kind of come to that yourselves?
Would you like to speak?
It's a good question. Yeah, I think for me, a big part of it has been learning about my actual ancestors more interest. It's like in my family, I feel like I've heard some of the stories like 100 times, like about the old castle in Scotland where my family used to live, and Hague's bottling water in London and the Hague whiskey, but I haven't really heard them, or I don't know if other people experience this with family history. It's just goes in one ear and out the other ear all through my childhood. And even being in a family that's lucky enough to have some of those stories to pass down. So I think I finally started to actually be like, wait, go back. Can you explain that little detail a bit more? And conversations with my auntie and uncle and my mum, and I'm thinking differently about my grandparents and learning about the role that one side of my family played in the colonial office in India and Malaysia. it's been one way of connecting more with ancestors, actually looking at the photos of them, you know, and spending a bit of time with that, rather than just brushing it off, which I think I previously had, and rather than trying to like judge them or something, to learn about them and be open. Like I went and found my great-great-great-grandfather's gravestone in Aotearoa a couple of years ago. And whatever he may have done as like one of the top Canterbury Association members, you know, a big player in the colonisation of Te Waipounamu, it's learning about that and just tuning in to the fact that he is my bloodline. Like his 17-year-old maid who became his wife after his first wife died, gave him 7 more children, so he had his 14. You know, even like the idea of having 14 children, it's like inconceivable. But so many of our ancestors had that many children. Like we talked quite a lot about matrilines, thinking about the women in our family line. And one question that we got asked when we did this White Awake course that you mentioned in the introduction, really beautiful activity. We were asked, when was a woman last in your bloodline revered in her body? And that really made me think, I guess that's where it starts to get a bit deeper and older, because I feel like women haven't really been revered and safe in their bodies for really quite a long time. There's so much pain and grief and anger and sorrow in me when I think of that question and what has happened to all the women's bodies in my bloodline and how I hold and carry that, and it sort of helps me make sense more of my own experience in the present around all sorts of things, but you know, especially sex and consent. And it's just like learning about the witch hunts. The impact that it's had on us is untold, but it's one way. It's one way that I've found that I've connected with my ancestors. Thinking about natural lines.
And it sort of makes sense of our experience, I think. Makes sense of a grief and a pain.
Totally. Yeah, totally.
I was struck by one of the guest speakers, Bo, at Gathering at the Gate, talked about doing our own healing work, attending to our own healing and wounds, so that we're careful not to take those into relationship with Māori. And I resonated with that. And actually don't know where I'm going with saying that.
I can pick up something. Pick up that weave together those last bits about grief, because that's been coming up a lot in places that I was going to say something about grief, and I have heard it said that shame is the thin lid on a deep well of grief. It's a hard thing to hold, because Pākehā grief, what I might call Pākehā grief, which could be about wanting to actually look at those histories of harm that our ancestors received. It's like we don't want to hang on to that too hard, or sort of spew that all over Māori spaces and be like, oh look, but these bad things happen to us too, and but at the same time there is so much there that I do think needs to be felt, and the cost of not feeling those things is actually really huge. And so I think that is something that we are trying to do with Gathering at the Gate, is provide a space where it's appropriate to start to feel those things. I also heard it said that that one of our jobs is to cry all of the tears that our ancestors never cried, as a way to help them pass over.
I like that.
And sorry, go on.
Sometimes I feel like I need to be productive in order to be a useful person. But I love the idea that one very good way of contributing is to cry.
Yeah. I think of it as like a kind of breathing in and breathing out thing. It's like there's this pulse of retreating to cry and to grieve and to sort of sit with that, and then coming out again and going to protest or doing some iwi tautoko work, anti-racist work on the Facebook comment section, and then it's just like this.
Yeah,
you know,
that's
maybe
nice.
that-
Yeah.
yeah.
I remember you saying the other day that through doing this ancestral work that you've discovered sources of energy that fuel you. What you just said reminds me of that.
Yeah, I was talking about that, about feeling like they're at my back. Sometimes I can get a felt sense, especially if I've been meditating and got that more subtle awareness going on of a group, like a big group behind me. Things in the present feel less personal and more handleable because I actually am not alone. Yeah, and like equally with the tears that we are now able to cry that our ancestors couldn't for whatever reason. It's also just the strength that they had. Like when I learn about just the numbers of children and thinking about not having electricity and like all of the conditions that they lived in, what they actually did survive.
Yeah.
It's quite strength giving.
Yeah. So this group behind your back is like really hardy.
They are really hardy. Yeah. And they went through loss and grief and shame and pain just like we do. And I think you alluded to it before. It kind of makes sense out of some of our own feelings at times. Like sometimes I feel things that don't seem to belong entirely to me, and I think it can be the same with positive feelings too, or feelings of resilience.
Yeah.
I
like that. The other day, Ellie, you were saying that when you first experienced the shame when you went into learning te reo Māori, but that over time, that shame, just by feeling it, you were able, it changed and it softened. And I loved what you said about when you feel feelings, they change. I wondered if you could talk about that.
Yeah, that's it pretty much. I think we live in a dominant culture, a dominant white culture, that there's so much to be processed that thin lid of shame doesn't often get lifted because there's just the kind of toxic happiness thing going on, especially with social media.
Toxic happiness,
positivity, not toxic happiness, toxic positivity, like reframing everything as a good thing and kind of just the kind of illiteracy, I guess. I feel like I didn't really grow up learning how to identify my feelings, let alone kind of allow them. Those skills come through probably more meditating and nonviolent communication to a certain extent, and just like really rich and deep friendships, women's group, like safe spaces where vulnerability is encouraged, and we're not trying to fix each other's problems or give advice or be in like problem-solving mode, but just allowing our feelings to be felt, and then they tend to move through. So it's that shame that I have experienced, and like Ren said, still totally experience on a regular basis, especially in Māori spaces where I'm not sure what my role is, and I desperately trying to decenter myself, but it's like really hard to do that when you're really like wrapped up in your own experience. And just getting in my head. But it's okay. It's okay to feel shame. I think that's something I said is that it really is a shame. It really is a shame what has happened, and it's shameful the way that people are still marginalised, and the disparity in wealth and education and health outcomes and all the rest of it. So it's like the appropriate response. I feel like having that shame or embarrassment or guilt or whatever you want to call it is like totally appropriate
Mm.
emotional response. You're tuned into the collective.
It's not going to kill us.
No, it's not. It's definitely not. And getting paralyzed and stuck in the guilt is not ideal. And I think that's kind of what Red was referring to before. It's like we do actually need spaces where, as white people with other white people, we can hold and process our emotions together without expecting people of colour to have the solutions or people of colour to hold us in that, because that's where I think it gets really violent.
Yeah. I'm really interested in, because, I'm focusing on home this year, and I'm interested in how your sense of home and belonging has shifted and changed as you've been doing this work. I guess a question to begin with could be, where have you felt a sense of home and belonging?
Well, interestingly, it's uncanny. You mentioned that old colonial house that I grew up in. 1863 in Ruby Bay, or Te Mamaku, as I much later learned it was called. And since doing this uncovering of ancestry, I found out that not only my mum's ancestors, but also my dad's ancestors lived very nearby. My mum's ancestors were German, the Schroders from the very north of Germany, and they came in 1844 to a farm in Waimea, and my dad's ancestors were there too, the Blundells. And they'd seen the map of their plots, with their names on them.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'd always had the sense of being kind of planted there without any roots. And now I know that I've been to the graves of my my ancestors. They're very, very like a stone's throw from where I grew up, and that's been kind of uncomfortable in some ways, and also my sense of belonging that I have felt in this area, it was kind of validating in some ways. It's like my people's bones are here. And I've been going to visit them. Like when I drive past the cemetery, I'll take some shells or like little random things from my car and just drop them off. And so there's this kind of sense of connecting more with this place in a kind of historical way, and at the same time learning more about the history of this place, and feeling that there is a historical connection to Aotearoa, Ngāti Tamaki Te Tauihu, Ngāti Apa. I mean, there's 8 Te Aotearoa, and just feeling like, okay, so there's a kind of a more specific relationship there that I can maybe claim at some point if the context was right. And there is something that's kind of relieving and relaxing about mapping the specificities of historical connections, and it's made me feel like there are webs of connections that were there that I actually didn't know that were there in the past. Like when I've been in Māori spaces before and everyone's going around introducing themselves and I've just got nothing to say about connections that I have, and now I'm just sort of starting to be like, I do actually have a connection to Waipukuro, I do actually have a connection to Pātea, I do actually, and they're not happy connections, but they are a connection, and that's something. And so it's like finding some kind of strange belonging that is about having those relationships, or the possibility of those relationships. And I think it's a long process, and I'm not like, I think there is a very strong desire for belonging. There is a lot of grief around not belonging, but I just don't feel too worried about that anymore. I feel sort of kind of at home in an unknowingness, or in a kind of mystery of how it all might yet unfold. That makes any sense.
Totally. I love that about the uncovering what you actually already do have. It's not like having to create anything more. It's just that's so cool that your family, I didn't know that, that your family both moved to the area that you were born in.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah.
In the 1840s.
Yeah, crazy. Yeah, it's just pulling those threads. It does make sense what you just said about I'm not worrying about it too much anymore. I was just thinking, when you asked that question, Lou, like, how many people on the planet don't live where their ancestors lived? That's one of the many things which sets Indigenous peoples apart. Having your ancestors, like your deep, deep ancestors, buried in a place close to you is like an element of being Indigenous, which I'm not Indigenous. So I'm not looking for that kind of belonging. I know that I don't have that kind of belonging. And instead I have all these material privileges, and I'm not seeking that kind of connection like tūranga waiwai or something anymore, because I don't know, maybe it is that sense of having the ancestors at my back, and like Ren's saying, like the mystery of how it might yet all unfold. That's pretty beautiful, and also just like some kind of weird sense of solidarity with all the other diasporic peoples living on the planet, who are dislocated in various ways that intersect with race and class and what have you.
Yeah. I love your descriptions of the specificity of these relationships that did exist in the past, and also specific relationships that exist now. And I don't know, it's sort of like, there's something about that web of relationships that is forming still, and that we can just be present with. And maybe that is the creation of home or belonging now, wherever we are. Just a thought.
Beautiful, I love that.
It also makes me think of this new word that I learnt last week, sympoesis, which I discovered means creating together, and it has this sense of just being in the muck of real life now and forming relationships with other people in the land and other creatures and critters. Yeah, it brings me to the question of what seeds of hope do you have for the future, especially in Aotearoa, and what visions inspire you?
Something that we've riffed off with Gathering at the Gate and with our participants is to like take a stroll around your neighbourhood and sense into what it might have been like had Te Tiriti and He Whakaputanga been honoured the whole time.
Yeah, cool.
And I still do that. I still walk around with that lens on. There is a sadness in that, in the sense that it's just really not like that, but kind of envisioning what that might feel like. And yeah, I mean, for me, there's just a sense that we would be getting around and we would know exactly who mana whenua were and whose land we were on and who we were in relationship with when we're in that place. There would be a sense of like boundaries, like, oh, we're crossing this river now and now we're in this rohe. And maybe there would be rituals of encounter that sort of are more common around the place when we're moving around. Yeah. That land would be owned and managed by mana whenua, and everyone else, or like tangata tiriti, all of the rest of us would be living there because of our relationships with mana whenua, and maybe we would have roles and responsibilities in that capacity, to be caring for certain bits, and there'd be heaps of feasting and heaps of singing and heaps of dancing, incredible like syncretic music situations. And I mean some of that it doesn't actually feel too far-fetched, and I do know Pākehā who have entered into land back arrangements with mana whenua nearby, where they've like given the land back to them. It kind of brings them into a connection and they just become like part of the whānau, and I love that. And you're talking about the relationships that might yet emerge, and yeah, I certainly hope for something like that in my future and in all of our futures, that we might know very deeply who we live with, and feel responsible for that land, and and like take care of it in a way that's aligned with tikanga of that hapu. And I'm sure there's heaps of that kind of stuff happening already.
Yeah. Can you imagine what our homes might be like? I mean, obviously they'd all be different, but do you have any visions or ideas for that? I'm partly thinking of how at the moment we're all living in these separate little houses and we have these separate little groups, and there's not much that integrates or connects us because we go to the supermarket to get food. We don't do food together. I love to imagine a home that is more connected.
Yeah, intergenerational kind of. I mean, lot of times I spent on Noho Marae and Marae spaces, it's just like, oh, this is just so good. This just feels so right and easy, and just like kids around everywhere, and the old people are looked after super well and really centered, and there's always heaps of food, and it's those spaces just feel so great.
Yeah, I guess it's more like I don't necessarily know what my home would look like or particular kind of households, but more that these kaupapa Māori ways of doing things, which are already totally in action in lots of places, that is more intergenerational, and young people and old people are really revered, and the focus of decision making, and te taiao is the focus of decision making. I see that with a totally Tiriti-based future, that those ways of doing things which are normal in Te Ao Māori are just more and more mainstream and normal in Aotearoa as a whole. I feel like we already have that, but it just doesn't get a light shone on it. Maybe enough in like mainstream media, and just like allowing these systems, especially around care, bubble up and emerge and be really localized. So there's no like cookie cutter one size fits all type thing, but I have hope for the future when I think about like even what Ren and I have shared where we started, and like really hardly having any consciousness about te tiriti or anything in high school, and now kids are starting in quite a different place because that's mandatory. It's like part of the curriculum, but I feel like it has to come with this really personal emotional, spiritual aspect to it. Otherwise, people are really just coming, like we've talked about, from a place of shame.
Yeah.
Trying to prove something, or being very anxious about getting things right. And, we do see a lot of tokenism and just incompetency. But I feel like the future generations, if my son's anything to go by, his ability to walk between worlds and speak some Māori and like lots and lots of waiata in his life, and he's a little Pākehā boy, and he's going to learn what his whakapapa is and what it means to be Pākehā from me and his dad, but he's also going to be in Te Ao Māori. That lots of kids in Aotearoa will grow up like that, and he's starting from a different place, and so there's also a weird hope in how much more extreme climate change is going to make the future, and so, like responding to disasters, like Marae just responds so well to disasters. They just really resourced with mātauranga on how to do that, and so I think more and more we'll see shit getting real, and an Indigenous response is show itself to be strong and resilient and something to follow and listen to.
I think a key message that I've got from this conversation is that shame can make us feel paralysed, but that there are sources of support and like life and healing available to us. That shame is not the end. It's just, like you said, a cap on something, and there's these rich sources that we can draw on.
But I guess like you're saying with healing, I just make a plug for like how all of these things interrelate, because like the podcast you have been looking at the industrial mother pig. Like I think if your life depends on being involved in that 40-hour work week, like the slog of just keeping up with the cost of living, which so many people, that's the reality. It's pretty hard to make space. Like, when would you do the healing? So it is also a really privileged position to be in. I wouldn't want people to think it's like, oh yeah, just click your fingers and do the healing, because it's actually a lot.
And I think a big focus of mine has been just recognizing how much of our energy is pouring into maintaining that kind of work cycle and, suckling the industrial mother pig, how consuming that is, and whether there are little ways that we can at least release a little bit of our energy or make a little bit of time and just get a little bit more free from that.
I was really struck last week chatting with a beautiful wahine Māori, who I may yet call a friend, and she's a mama of 4 and works full time and is on like multiple boards, just doing so much work, and she's just completely knackered. And just talking about how she, she takes an extra minute in the shower every now and then. That's time just for herself to breathe, just take moments here and there, and maybe that's a way. Just like there's sort of gaps in and around the kids and the day and all of the things that require our energy and attention, where we can just breathe and replenish for a moment. And I'm speaking as someone who has relatively quite a lot of time. I don't have kids and I don't work full time. But I really see and appreciate that approach.
Yeah.
I guess you asked that question earlier, Lou, as well, about taking the time to heal, or referring to Bo's idea of do the healing, go to therapy. It's sort of before trying to engage, and I just feel like it has to be a both and scenario. That it's totally both things happening at the same time, and in relationship to each other, the work, the busyness, the life, and the inner work. And maybe just not having to just having that space where you have a buddy who's also white or Pākehā or identified in the same way as you, where you can share your difficulties but then otherwise keep it quite close to yourself and not using lots of energy trying to explain it to the whole world.
Yeah. Well,
I just want to say I left my charger at home, so I've got 28%.
Yeah, okay. I could ask my ending question that I sometimes ask.
Yeah, go on.
If you can imagine that you're 80 years old, sitting in your favourite chair and looking out at your favourite view, surrounded by the people you love. If you look back over your life, what do you feel most proud of?
Good question. I think I would at that point feel really proud of my willingness to stay with the muck, stay with the trouble, and keep showing my face and keep at it. Yeah, and all of the connections and relationships that I've created along the way and maintained. And to just feel really wholly a part of that web.
Nice.
I can so see you. 80 years. Imagine that.
Yeah.
It's such a cool, orienting question. I often think of that. I don't say 80, I say 50. I'm just what would 50-year-old me be proud to look back on? It's not, but it's far enough away that it feels like it's a bit of perspective. I think, the right side of history, I feel like there's a clarity that comes with, hindsight. And being able to look back on what the world has gone through and what we've been through here in Aotearoa in terms of responding to conditions and just feeling at peace with, standing up for what I see as just and being accountable to tangata whenua and to my own ancestors and to my grandchildren, taking all of the big, Ren saying, the big web of relationships into account. And also just making life full of magic and joy and fun and the work, because it can be quite heavy and serious sounding. So it's actually the best laughs and friends and connections and life-giving times have come for me from engaging in this work.
Oh, yeah.
I'd like that to continue.
Yeah. And I'm just remembering back to your childhood experiences of running through the fields to the beach and directing a show with your wand. Just a thought. So, yeah, we can end there.
Oh, amazing.
Thank you. That was amazing. If you'd like to find out more about Gathering at the Gate, just go to gathering-at-the-gate.org. And a big thanks to Ellie, Ren, Danny and Erin for their brave work in this space. The quote Ren referred to about shame being the thin lid on top of a well of grief comes from Megan Chandler, one of the co-creators of Recalling Our Ancestors, another Turtle Island-based online program akin to White Awake and Gathering at the Gate. The other quote about crying the tears of our ancestors is from Malidoma Patrice Somé. It was quoted in an amazing documentary about reckoning with slaveholding ancestry called Traces of the Trade, directed by Katrina Brown. Here's the quote in full. In the Dagara tribe of West Africa, it is believed that the dead do not pass over into peace until the living have cried all the tears that these ancestors did not cry in their lifetimes, for that which they suffered and for the suffering they caused others. May we, the living, find tears that will bring peace to both us and the ancestors. And finally, the song I played halfway through the show was recorded around a campfire at the tracker camp Ren told us about. It came to the singer June Rogers during her sit-spot practice that morning. And I'll leave you with another campfire song from teenager Remini Holmes, which also came to her during her sit-spot practice.
From